I was laying there, and through the ceiling, a light like a fluorescent light. I don't know if that's the right word, but it came and it entered my chest. 1 minute I'm freaking out. The next minute I feel like this sense of peace like I've never felt before, an absolute sense of peace. It was like it downloaded to me, everything is all right. And not only is everything all right, everything has always been all right and always will be all right.
All right, Wendy. Wendy, where are you from originally? Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Santa Monica.
And tell me about your family growing up.
Well, we looked good on the outside, but there was a lot going on behind closed doors. My mother was schizophrenic, and for the first 7 years of my life, she was, suicidal, often taken to Camarillo State Hospital, given shock treatment, and then sent back home to be mom. It was kind of like having a sleeper cell living in the same house with you because I never knew what I would get when I got home. And when I was 7, she ended up going away to Camarillo State Hospital, and she went to stay with her parents' house in Stockton, California, and she killed herself. She actually took a big shipping trunk full of photographs of her wedding, of her kids, and pulled it over her in the bathtub after she cut her wrist. And so she drowned. And I didn't know this. I would find out later. But, when I did find out as a teenager, I said I would never, ever be like my mother. But like saying never is like giving the universe exact coordinates to where you're going to land. Because inevitably, I would become her. She in a psychotic break killed herself. And, I ended up having a psychotic break the same age as she was at 38 and in the county jail.
Do you think these things are genetic?
Well, I think that there's intergenerational trauma that is passed down and, it's unconscious and, until somebody wakes up, and I've been waking up one eyelash at a time since then, that, to change the trajectory of the family's lineage, the trauma, somebody has to be courageous enough to heal and look under the trunk. I wasn't looking under the trunk all the time. I was using drugs and alcohol because I carried so much pain that I needed something to metabolize, and drugs and alcohol was my way of metabolizing it.
Yeah, putting a light on your dark secrets and trauma is really the only way, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I believe that that's how we heal, and we connect through story, and that's.
That's how you take away its power, I think.
Yeah.
Because if something's left in the closet, secret, it just thrives.
Yeah, it's the beast.
So after you lost your mom at what age?
7. 7.
And what happens after that?
Well, a series of things like, my dad was drinking. My oldest brother, ended up later having a schizophrenic break as well. And, it was just, the family didn't talk about these secrets. It was like almost like every man for himself, alcoholic father, a man that couldn't handle one more disappointment. And I happened to be that disappointment. And so did, some of the other kids. We all started acting out in our own ways.
How many siblings?
4, including me.
And do any of your siblings have similar addiction issues?
It manifested in different ways. My older sister addicted to exercise, but she certainly drank. But she was a triathlete and Ironman, and exercise. I think saved her.
Another form of the same thing.
Yeah, and then my brother was schizophrenic. He passed away, and my younger brother, he just struggles with his own unresolved issues.
How far did you go in school?
I dropped out. And then got a GED later, and went on to get certified in drug and alcohol counseling later on, much later. I felt like, having made it through the other side, that, I was uniquely qualified. I had a PhD in substance abuse. So why not use my experience to help others?
Sure.
Yeah.
But when were the first signs that you were your mom's daughter?
Well, I think there were signs, only like I said, I was unconscious. You could say the first time I went to Camarillo State Hospital, for cutting my wrist, back then it wasn't a 5150 and I was an adolescent, 16. And so I ended up in the same place as my mother had been, and I was unconsciously walking in her footsteps. The more I tried not to be like her, the more I became like her.
That's interesting.
And that would later happen with my own kids, history repeating itself.
What was your darkest moment?
The darkest moment?
What was your bottom?
The bottom was 38, the same age my mother was at. And I had my own version of a drug-induced psychotic break. I was married. I had 2 sons. One was 17 and one was 9. And, I had been doing meth for days. And, my husband at the time went out to score for this girl, this young girl. And he was taking way too long. And in fact, every time he went out to score for her, he would be gone for a long time. And it sort of hit me like, call it women's intuition, a hunch or anything. But I knew it was late at night. I knew he was cheating on me, right? And so, I didn't realize it at the time. I was, I would either the raged, I crossed that line where I worked myself up into this kind of, meth-induced eyeball boiling rage that I'm going to show him when he gets home. I'm going to show him, but I just wanted to scare him. So we had a .38 Smith & Wesson in the house. I waited by the doorstep. My youngest son was asleep. My older boy was spending the night at his friend's. And I waited for them to get back. And when the car pulled up, it was her car, El Camino, white El Camino, pulled up in front of the house. I ran outside, and he was looking for a parking space. And I fired the gun over the car, not wanting to hurt anybody or hit anybody. And he turned the corner and stopped. He stopped the car. I have no idea why he stopped the car, but I ran after the car and I threw myself over the hood like a special ops commando and pointed the gun at him. And I had a moment of like clarity, like if anybody were to see you right now, they might think you were crazy. But it wasn't enough to stop my actions. And as he stepped on the gas, I fired another round towards the ground, but it ricocheted on the roll bar of the car and hit her in the arm. And I didn't know this as they were driving off. I didn't know that the bullet had hit her. And my best thinking was, I'll go into the house and change my clothes so that if I'm put up in a lineup, nobody will recognize me. The cops won't be able to identify. That's how I'm going to fix it. But again, I was having a psychotic break and didn't know it. I was the last one to know. I was in psychosis and...
What were your drugs?
Methamphetamine at that time. I mean, I've changed seats on the Titanic. When I was in my 20s, I was doing heroin. Alcohol was a constant. So it was always changing seats, anything to help me, with that trauma, that unresolved trauma and grief of losing a mother at 7. So needless to say, the cops did come. The cops did take me away. And I would say my darkest moment was when the drugs wore off and I realized how I had been impacting my children, and it was so crushing. It was just so crushing. There I was doing same thing, well, different, but, hurting my children like my mother had hurt me, and, I thought there was going to be no way back. There was going to be no way to make amends to my kids after this. I thought my life was over. He moved the girl into the house. So he took her to the hospital. He moved her in like the same night. So, I actually just opened the door for them to have a relationship, me entirely out of the way. And I ended up getting a year for assault with a deadly weapon. They would not testify. And I plea bargained a deal and got assault. And started doing my year, and while you're in county jail, you have a lot of time to think. I had been there before, but I always thought about when I get out of here, I can't wait to get high. This time I'm thinking, how can I ever make it up to my kids? How can I ever, stop this runaway train that is impacting everybody in my family?
What impact do you think your abuse, your drug abuse, addiction, whatever, how do you think that affected your children?
Well, it became like when I was in the county jail, I didn't have the full picture, but in hindsight, I can see that, my older son, Jerry, ended up going to juvenile. He ended up getting in the system. And he and my youngest son, Ricky, when I got out of jail, I moved to Pico and 11th Street, where it was Claire Women's and Children's Housing there. I got a place, and I thus started my attempt at recovery. But I still carried so much shame and pain. I didn't, it was like I ended up drinking again. But what changed was on Mother's Day. It was late at night, and I was with, Ricky was asleep. Again, he was asleep. And my older son was off somewhere, and I heard 4 gunshots ring out. And when I looked out the blinds, laying in the street was a body, and just for clarification, part of my addiction disease was self-centeredness in every form. And it was always about me. I don't want to get involved. The cops may come or will come. And but beyond anything I had ever done before, I went to the kid that was laying in the street. He was a young guy that had been shot 4 times. And, I talked to him. I got down on my knees, and it was kind of like everything slowed down into this kind of just present moment of me on my knees next to this strange boy that was gasping for breath, and me telling him, please hang in there, don't die. I didn't say don't die, but I just hang in there. I could hear the sirens coming. I said, they're on their way. And even when the cops got there, they put the yellow line around me, and the boy, and they thought I was his mother, until one of the cops asked me, are you his mother? I said, no, I live up there. And they made me get behind the yellow line. But the ambulance took him away. I wasn't sure what would happen to him, and I was kind of freaking out. Was that a sign? Something bad's going to happen to my kids? I thought everything was a sign. I had a punishing and rewarding higher power that I don't have today. And that night, while I was trying to sleep, I was freaking out, like majorly, and wanted to go to the liquor store, but I didn't want to pass the cops. I didn't want to leave my son. I had a spiritual experience, is all I can describe it. And I was laying there, and through the ceiling, a light, like a fluorescent light. I don't know if that's the right word, but it came and it entered my chest. 1 minute I'm freaking out. The next minute I feel like this sense of peace like I've never felt before, an absolute sense of peace. It was like it downloaded to me, everything is all right. And not only is everything all right, everything has always been all right and always will be all right. Everything is all right. And I didn't know what that was. The next day I started questioning, did that really happen? And it happened. It happened. Something, an experience I had never felt in my life. And I found out the boy died. I found out from neighbors the boy died. And I go, was that the boy's spirit that came to me to thank me for being there by him? Or was that God? What was that? That light that would profoundly change me and the direction of my life. And it really didn't matter. But what I would later come to believe is that by being service to another struggling human being, I would be profoundly changed. Because it's like, I believe we're here for one another. I believe that we're here for one another and we've forgotten. I forgot. And so that sent me in a completely different direction. I started seeking spiritual, meditation centers, just, people that were, seeking a higher power and, and also the 12-step community. And I started being of service,
What age was this?
That I was 39 or 40, around there. And, so I wanted to use my experience, like I said, my substance abuse experience, to help other people. And, people said, maybe you should be a counselor, and I go, okay. So I kind of followed that thread and ended up in a detox helping people that were struggling. And it seemed that I was uniquely qualified to help the people sitting on the other side of the desk. And that, was part of my journey. But one thing, when I was living at that shelter and I couldn't afford a pair of shoes, this woman, for my son, Ricky, this woman ended up, Becky, she bought him 2 pairs of shoes. She was an alumni of his, of Claire Foundation. And my son became a big sneakerhead, after that. He grew up to have hundreds of shoes. And ultimately, when he moved out and he was in his 30s, because he was getting in trouble in his youth, but as he moved into his 30s, he had kind of his own crisis, not with drugs, but with women and a girl specifically. And he looked at his shoes that were neatly stacked on the wall, from the floor to the ceiling, and asked himself, like, what are you doing with all those shoes? You wear like 5 pairs of them, and he had this realization that, to give his shoes away, to give some of his shoes away. So he put them in the car and drove around LA and started giving them out to homeless people, and, he only had one size, 10 and a half. And ultimately, would start getting dope. He started posting on Instagram. People started sending him shoes, and he created a nonprofit, you know. And, you know, I tell this story because, you know, when I was in county jail or when I was living in that transitional house, I never imagined that, you know, I would go on to help other people, or that I would go on to be a writer, or he would go on to create a nonprofit. It was like my bandwidth was so narrow. I couldn't imagine that kind of life. But, you know, he started that 14 years ago. It's a big part of my life. And he's given over like 90,000 pairs of shoes since then with the help of Nike and other brands, you know. And it's like, if someone was to look at us from the outside, oh, she's on welfare. Oh, she can't even afford shoes. She just got out of jail. She's on probation. What a loser. Or her son doesn't have a chance. You know, it goes to show that, you know, it's just a snapshot of my life. And my life is a moving frame. All of our lives are a moving frame. And we don't know. We don't know where the story is going, you know. And I've been fortunate enough to be helped by a lot of people that have been kind. And as defended as I was when I first, you know, was getting sober, I lived a very defended life. I had no defense against kindness. And people were so kind to me, you know, from that woman buying my son a couple pairs of shoes. It's just countless kind acts. And that kindness, it transforms, it has the power to transform people.
It's beautiful. Looking back at your story, are there things, if you had your life to live over again, would you have done things differently?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I would. You know, I would like to say I have no regrets, but I do have regrets. You know, my oldest son, Jerry, recently passed a few days before Christmas. And thank you. It was devastating, you know, and I have been spending the last 32 years of my recovery, sober time, trying to make amends. And he ended up, you know, moving to Riverside, getting a wife, having kids, and being a very devoted father. You know, he would be at all his games and everything. But when he passed, as much as I felt like we had healed our relationship, as a mother, I just like still, was there more I could have said? Was there anything more I could have done? You know? And it's like, I don't know if I'll ever, you know, I'm learning how to forgive myself. I am, you know, and I have forgiven myself for a lot of it, but I regret impacting my kids.
Were you hard on yourself for all the things you did?
The shame, you know.
That's one of the biggest problems with addiction is the shame that parents have or loved ones have.
I had so much shame, you know. You know, I've had therapy. I've done the 12 steps. I've had energy work. I wrote. Writing, I think, for me is like so cathartic, and it's like when I write and I put my story out there, it's like it gives it a new narrative. You know, the only language I spoke before was victimese. You know, and it's like if my story can be used as an instrument to help somebody, whether it's the addict who's still suffering, whether it's somebody out there listening to your show, if somebody reading my book, if it's anybody can be inspired by my story, it feels like it gives in my life a new narrative. And then, you know, when my book did come out, the shame, I was flooded again with a tsunami of shame. But what I realized after it was out there for a while, I go, the shame doesn't own me anymore. It doesn't own me. It doesn't keep me small in a box, cut off from, my secrets. I know what it's like to hold. I'm a secret keeping machine, but not anymore, So, that's why I reached out to you, because you're breaking down barriers and like giving people a platform that, to tell their stories. And their stories will touch others.
Yeah, I get emails I get messages every day, pretty much since I started doing this for 7 years, every day, from people saying how that's why I post daily, because it's almost like a therapy session for people, or it's just a reminder of what their life could have been or was or could be.
Yeah.
And it's just helps. I see how it helps people stay on track.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed those messages.
Yeah.
So you wrote a book.
So I wrote a book. I wrote a couple books, but the first one I wrote was, so in my recovery, I got into a practice of meditation and started meditating and going to some meditation centers. And in meditation one day, I knew I was supposed to write a book, but I wasn't a writer. So it was like, it just seems too daunting and too big a book, But I kept getting this nudge. It was like my internal GPS was guiding me that I had to write this book. So I started taking writing classes, started going to writing groups with other women, And again, I had to tackle that shame that I felt, that fear of being exposed. But I kept going back and learning how to write, got better at writing, and still getting better at writing. But so, yeah, I wrote a book, and I had my sons, both my sons, read the portions that they were in and asked if they were okay with it, and they both gave me their blessings. They both came to my book opening. It was just like, so I can see the healing, even though my son has passed, and I may question whether or not there was anything more I could do. I can see the evidence of the healing. And just like his trajectory was changed, and he became a father to his kids because he wanted to give them. He was the dad in the stands cheering them on. He was the dad buying a boat, taking them to the lake every weekend. So he really changed the trajectory. It's like breaking the family lineage of alcoholism, mental illness, addiction. It's like, it gives me chills. It gives me chills, like, what a blessing. There is a way out. There is a way out. Only I didn't know it, I had to show up for another human being that was laying in the street that had been shot to realize we are here for one another. We are all connected.
And looking back now, what would you call that event that happened to you with the light and all that? Is that some spiritual awakening? Is it a...
Yeah, I don't know what else.
Are you more religious now?
I'm not religious, no. No, I'm not religious. I'm spiritual. I have a meditation practice. Writing is part of my way of connecting to something. I believe that we all have an inner resource.
Were you ever tempted by the drugs after that?
It would rarely cross my mind. But what began to happen is the payoff from staying sober became greater than any craving. It just like, I'm not going to blow up my life like I used to all the time because I have all of this community, all of these people, that circled the wagons. And when my son passed a few months ago, that same evening, I had 30 women on a Zoom call sitting with me, asking, do you need anything? It was like, I was the girl in county jail that no one came to visit. That was where my life ended up in the early 90s. And now I have this incredible community that is, it's hard to describe because it's experiential. But when you have people just there for you to talk to, they're just there. It's unlike anything I've ever experienced. And I'm so glad I got sober to experience. But no, I am not religious. I am have a connection with nature, and I like quantum physics. I like that, and that we are all one and that we are all connected. And I feel it when I go for a hike, and just hear the birds and smell the dirt, the sage, and just go, whoa, if that's when I feel connected to something higher. So I'd say my spirituality is put together with super glue and masking tape, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, but nothing organized.
Wendy, let me ask you one last question. What would you say is the most important lesson you've learned in all of this?
I think the most important lesson I've learned is that we're here for one another, and that all of my life experience can be used as a tool to help someone else. And that's a totally different mindset from the selfish, self-seeking addict I was before I got sober.
What a great story.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. What's the name of your book?
Mother Load, L-O-A-D.
Wonderful. I'll leave a link in the description. Thank you so much, Wendy.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Mm-hmm.